1 week after Kevin McCarthy announced a formal impeachment inquiry into President Biden, members of his own party, his fellow Republicans, continue to tell the press in a variety of ways that there is no direct evidence connecting the president to any misconduct. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, much as we would rather not accept it, this is an ongoing story, and so we need to continue to discuss it because the credibility of this impeachment inquiry into the president continues to erode, and it didn't have much by way of credibility to begin with. So we're going to start actually with an op-ed in the Washington Post. We're not going to read the entire thing, but though it is relatively short, and I would encourage you to read it. It's written by a guy named Ken Buck, who we've talked about in previous videos. He is a far-right Republican in the House of Representatives, a member of the MAGA-loving, Trump-loving Freedom Caucus. Again, this is not a self-professed moderate Republican. This is a guy who is a card-carrying member of the die-hard Trump faction, and he has persistently said from the beginning he just doesn't see the evidence. After 9 months since Republicans have been in power in the House of Representatives, really much longer than that, as people in my comment section have pointed out, really, the Republicans have been trying to investigate President Biden and via Hunter Biden for years, even before he was president in 2019 and 2020 as well. But he wrote this op-ed, "My fellow Republicans, one disgraceful impeachment doesn't deserve another." And basically he makes the case that, I mean, this is a man who disagreed with both of Donald Trump's impeachments, which he's just simply wrong on the facts there. Those impeachments were well-deserved. But he's like, look, just because Donald Trump, in his opinion, was impeached wrongly twice doesn't mean that Republicans should do the same. Republicans have decided to divert attention into an impeachment inquiry against President Biden, and this is, as he says, barreling towards a government shutdown without making progress on cutting our out-of-control spending. And again, that's his opinion. The GOP's charge against Biden is that he personally benefited from his son's deplorable business exploits around the world. And then he, calls out Hunter Biden for being shady. What's missing, despite years of evidence or despite years of investigation, Ken Buck says, is the smoking gun that connects Joe Biden to Hunter Biden's corruption. My fellow Republicans leading the House inquiry believe the connection comes from the firing of the corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin. And then again, he goes to debunk this as well. And again, we've discussed this at length, so we're not going to play through the facts of Shokin's corruption and the investigation or lack thereof into Burisma. But Ken Buck himself, this far-right, MAGA-loving Republican, goes to great lengths to debunk this conspiracy theory. Trump's impeachment in 2019 was a disgrace. This is how he concludes. Disgrace to a constitution and a disservice to the American people. The GOP's reprise in 2023 is no better. Okay, that's again Ken Buck. Now, with that in mind, Nancy Mace, who again is somebody we pick on quite a bit on this channel because she deserves it. She is a self-professed, moderate, reasonable, just like, hey, I'm so cool Republican, when in fact she is a coward. She's a moral coward. She folds like toilet paper in the face of any strong personality, and MAGA, of course, is calling the shots, this radical base in the GOP. And so she has become an outspoken proponent of the impeachment inquiry, and she goes on mainstream news networks like CNN and MSNBC and ABC and NBC to try to make the case. But this is what she has to say in response to Ken Buck's op-ed, a member of her own party, again, calling out this impeachment inquiry.
Let me also ask you, before you go, the impeachment inquiry that McCarthy announced, even though he had said he wouldn't do it without a vote, and then a few days later he does it without a vote. I want to read you something that Ken Buck, one of your Republican colleagues, had to say in a Washington Post op-ed of the impeachment inquiry. He said, impeachment is a serious matter and should have a foundation of rock-solid facts. Trump's impeachment in 2019 was a disgrace to the Constitution and is a disservice to Americans. The GOP's reprise in 2023 is no better. He says these allegations against the Biden family are part of an imagined history and a fictitious version of events. Was this premature, going all the way with an impeachment inquiry?
I don't believe so. The facts are everywhere. There are text messages, there are emails, there are witnesses, there are whistleblowers, there are meetings, there are phone calls, there are dinners, and you can't say, hey, there's a little bit of smoke, we're not going to follow the fire. And the inquiry, my understanding is, as you said earlier, gives us expanded subpoena powers. I want the bank records of Joe Biden. All of that should be on the table to prove out the allegations in the SARS reports. We're talking about a significant sum of money. We are talking about bribery. And in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 4, that is the basis for impeachment.
There's no evidence of bribery.
There are witnesses. The 1023 form, there are,
And you've been investigating. I mean, you're on the oversight.
There is evidence. We can't say that there's no evidence when there is evidence. And quite frankly,
there's no evidence.
It was the fourth estate. It was the media and journalists when Nixon was going down that helped do that investigation, helped bring down the president when he broke the law. And you guys want to deny that there's evidence? It's everywhere, and the bank records will prove it out.
All right.
So, a couple of things. The form FD 1023 that she's talking about, we talked about it before. It was an unverified allegation coming from a Ukrainian businessman that was said in private. That Ukrainian businessman then went on, about a year or two later, in a formal interview with the FBI to deny anything like that there was no relationship, no financial relationship with Joe Biden. And in that particular form, the FD 1023, the person who made the form, who reported the allegation, said that there's no evidence to confirm what they said in the first place. So it was an unverified allegation, the source of which then contradicted it a year later. They have no financial records connecting President Biden to any foreign interest that, number one, and number two, that is in any way corrupt, right? It's not illegal for a person to have financial ties to foreign business interests. Because then the question becomes, okay, what did he do to get that money? Can you point to a policy? Can you point to an action that constituted the bribe? They can't do that. They are so far away from this. And as Representative Dan Goldman pointed out, one of my favorite Democrats, as he pointed out, Donald Trump's own Department of Justice / FBI investigated that FD 1023 unverified allegation of bribery from the head of Burisma, who later denied it himself, as I just pointed out, and determined they were not credible. Donald Trump's own DOJ found that these allegations were not credible, which is why they didn't do anything with them. And then, as he points out, Representative Nancy Mace, you have 12,000 of bank records, and none of them link to the President of the United States. Now, again, if that's not enough, take it from yet another Republican, Representative McCall, what he has to say. This is like a 10-second clip.
Well, first of all, I've been tasked by the Speaker to assist the oversight and government reform. With respect to foreign policy decisions the President may have made, or Vice President, at that time, with respect to money coming in, to try to tie the two. We don't have the evidence now, but we may find it later.
We don't have the evidence now. We may find it later. And this, again, is the basis by which they are announcing a formal impeachment inquiry. Folks, this is a partisan political witch hunt. There is no equivalent and has been no equivalent of this from the Democratic Party. The two impeachments into Donald Trump were infinitely more substantive than what's going on here. And again, they continue to tell on themselves. They continue to publicly say, when the Fox propaganda network, it's not just CNN, it's not just ABC, it's not just MSNBC, when their own sympathetic networks like Fox News say, okay, what's the evidence? James Comer, Jim Jordan, McCall, Ken Buck, all the others, they're just like, no, there is none. Right? But we may get some later. That shouldn't be the basis by which you try to impeach the sitting president of the United States. And again, I imagine this isn't going to change anytime soon, but it just needs to be reaffirmed again and again and again. This is a partisan political witch hunt simply to hurt President Biden as we head into an election year. This should be called out. This is not the equivalent of Donald Trump's two impeachments, nothing close to it. And again, when you have not just moderate Republicans, but far-right, MAGA-loving Republicans saying, there's no there, this is baseless, you know you've missed the plot.